They touched down on Sailrix 6 just past dawn, beneath a fractured sky the color of bruised flesh. The red soil stirred around the landing skids of the shuttle, and out stepped 12 humans clad in white, clean, precise, unarmed. The suits were pressure-regulated, sealed for triage zones, with Red Cross insignias stitched over the heart. Each bore the faint creases of folding, the ghosts of previous deployments. No armor, no rifles, just scanners, stim packs, and their hands. Corporal Aline Marr adjusted the seal on her glove, ignoring the way the desert wind howled past the shuttle's flank. She looked young, perhaps too young, but her eyes were veteran-worn. She'd been on Europa during the reactor breaches. She'd sutured her own commander's lungs shut with a plasma needle and lived to forget about it. "This place reeks of bad scans," she muttered, eyes flicking to her portable diagnostic slate. The terrain was quiet. No enemy pings, no active EM signatures. Just a city carcass in the distance, and the echo of ruin. Lieutenant ISF Vale, tall and narrow-eyed, stood a few paces ahead. He didn't look back when he spoke. "Sailrix is under treaty. There are no scans to find." Aline almost laughed. Treaty. That word had stopped meaning anything around the time the Drazathai burned the oxygen domes over Kamaris. Yet Earth kept sending them, medics, healers, doctors wrapped in silence and hope, like a ritual too sacred to interrupt. The 12 of them began their walk toward the village husk. Each step pressed white boots into crimson dust. No banners flew from the wrecked buildings. No signs of life. Just the suggestion that someone had left in a hurry, and the certainty that they hadn't all made it out. "Dr. Keel," Vale said, tapping his comm. "Verify thermal echo south of the tower." A clipped reply. "Dead. Not warm enough for recovery." Vale didn't flinch. Just kept walking. Aline fell into step beside her roommate, Davi, a medic with fingers so steady he could stitch a vein mid-quake. He wore a child's friendship bracelet over his wrist seal. Some orphan back on Titan had given it to him after he restarted her heart. "You nervous?" Davi asked her softly. "I'm human," Aline replied. The team reached the first building, its roof half collapsed. They split in pairs, like always. Standard sweep pattern. Calm. Controlled. The idea was to be the stability others clung to. They entered the ruin. No sounds but the soft whisper of boots and the occasional crackle of dust underfoot. Then the broadcast hit. It wasn't a scream or a siren. It was worse. A voice Drazathai, full of that alien churn of consonants and slurred vowels. Translated, it read simply, "Neutrality is cowardice wrapped in shame. And shame must bleed." Aline's blood chilled. She turned just as the rooftop collapsed behind her, and a silhouette moved through the dust, too fast, too large, and absolutely armed. The first shot took Vale in the spine. His body twisted mid-fall, mouth open but silent. Davi screamed. Aline couldn't see who fired. The dust was too thick, the comms too scrambled. But she saw Davi fall with a neat hole through the visor, and the friendship bracelet melting in fire. She dropped to one knee, scanner flickering wildly. Vital signs vanished, one by one, like lights going out in a corridor. The Drazathai weren't targeting resistance. They were executing protocol. "White suits are compromised," someone gasped over comms. "There. Cut." Aline crawled through the dust and blood, dragging herself behind a beam as another blast shook the building. 2 meters away, a medic slumped against the wall, half his helmet gone, whispering through bubbling lungs, "Tell them we didn't run." Then his eyes fogged, and he stopped moving. She forced her suit's recorder to save the line, compressed the audio, labeled it "Final Breath." The attack lasted 13 minutes. 12 medics entered. None left. But one of them, Aline half-concussed, ribs cracked, helmet ruptured, managed to crawl into the debris, lay under a collapsed shelf, and trigger a dormant field beacon with her last breath. It was her last act. The Drazathai stood over her shortly after. Their armor hissed and glinted in the pale light as one of them spat on the beacon. Another leaned down, examining her with mild interest, then raised his weapon. She smiled at him. It wasn't peace. It was prophecy. Two fingers raised, the old treeout sign. Prepare to resuscitate. Half a galaxy away, on Earth, the broadcast hit every major channel within seconds. At first, it was described clinically. A breach of treaty. A failure of diplomacy. Some talking head called it a lapse in understanding. The footage, however, told a different story. Shaky body cam. Screams. Medkits trampled. And silence. That kind of silence humans knew. They'd heard it in old war memorials. In the black box from the Zydran breach. In the final minutes of the first colony lost on Centauri Prime. But this time, something different happened. The footage didn't fade. It paused. Zoomed. On a single image. Aileen's face, bloodied, behind her visor. Two fingers raised through the haze. Not begging. Not praying. Signaling. Prepare to resuscitate. It didn't go viral. It erupted. Within an hour, news feeds replaced ads with the image. By nightfall, med schools held vigils. By morning, old combat veterans quietly dusted off their tags. Earth had sent medics. The galaxy had answered with slaughter. Now the question hovered, silent but rising. Who do you send when the healers fall? In orbit above Jupiter, deep inside a subdermal relay station known only to a few as Ward 9, the image flickered onto a long-forgotten console. A woman with burn scars along her jawline leaned back in her chair, watching the footage repeat. She didn't blink when the blast hit Vale. Didn't flinch when Davi's vitals flatlined. But when Aline raised two fingers and smiled, she whispered, "It's time." A silent protocol activated. Encrypted signals burst across old satellite nets. Ancient clearance codes surfaced from digital graveyards. Somewhere beneath the ice of Enceladus, a vault opened. No metals. No flags. Just surgical steel. And names long thought dead. In the quiet hours before Earth responded, the galaxy watched. No one claimed responsibility, though the Drazathai were already composing their justifications. Peace had broken. Again. But this time, no one asked for sanctions. No one begged for diplomacy. They waited. Because they'd seen that image. The white suits hadn't fired a single shot. They'd walked into death, smiling. And the one left breathing hadn't cursed or begged. She'd given a signal. Two fingers. Prepare to resuscitate. It was not a warning. It was a prescription. And Earth had just read it. The door to the subterranean chamber hissed open with the sound of metal, remembering its purpose. Inside, the light was dim and clinical, blue-hued and cold, reflecting off stainless walls and the ripple of old scars that webbed across Commander Elon Reyes's throat. She stood alone in the observation pit of Ward 9, a place the public believed had been decommissioned after the Europa conflicts. A lie, one among many that kept Earth's darkest truths sealed beneath layers of silence and ice. On the center screen, the loop replayed again. Aline Mar, two fingers raised, blood on her teeth, still smiling. Reyes hadn't blinked the first time she saw it. She didn't blink now. What moved wasn't her expression, but her hand, hovering above a biometric plate. A silent authorization request glowed amber. Activate Seraph protocol. Her thumb pressed down. The chamber lights deepened. Machinery stirred. Locks clicked. Earth, in that moment, stopped pretending it didn't know how to grieve with vengeance. They had mocked humanity for sending medics. Now they'd meet the ones humanity didn't send to heal. Reyes walked the corridor, boots echoing off sterilized stone. Each step awakened dormant systems, sensor arrays, training sims, gene-coded access seals. On the walls, names whispered out in holographic shimmer. No ranks. No last names. Just call signs. Her voice was low and steady. Wake them. The first to respond was Cass. No one called her anything else. She came out of cryo with eyes already open, pupils dilated, scanning for signs of threat before breath. Cass had once been a battlefield nurse during the siege of Caracas, a siege that ended with her amputating her own crushed leg and crawling 3 miles through wreckage to evacuate 12 wounded civilians. She didn't speak much now. Her prosthetic leg clicked with purpose, every joint calibrated to silence. When Reyes approached, Cass said only, Which quadrant? Reyes handed her a medkit. Inside were no bandages, just scalpels, nanoblades, a stunner shaped like a cauterizing torch. Quadrant doesn't matter, Reyes said. They drew first blood. Cass nodded and walked away without another word. Next was Poe, still lean, still pale, with a face that hadn't changed since he was 17, and pulled a splinter bomb from a child's abdomen using a set of broken tweezers. Poe hadn't spoken a word in 9 years. Not since the Trillin evac. He didn't need to. His vitals were always perfect. Steady. Unshakable. He read lips, observed nerves. His hands moved with the rhythm of a musician and the ruthlessness of someone who had once begged for anesthesia and gotten laughter in return. He signed once with his fingers when Reyes handed him a black stim injector. Do they still bleed green? Reyes allowed herself a breath of grim amusement. They do. He signed again. Then I know where to start. 3 more followed, each chosen not for rank, but for what they'd endured, what they'd become when left behind. The Seraph Protocol had been humanity's silent gamble, a unit born not from offense, but refusal. These were not soldiers. Not anymore. They were clinicians of controlled death. In the center of the chamber, Reyes addressed them not like a commander, but like a surgeon ready to brief a team before a critical, one-way operation. This is not about honor, or politics, or even retribution. She pressed a button. Holograms flickered into being around them, images of the Salrix massacre. Frame by frame. Aline Mar, 24, field medic, volunteer, no kills on record, smiled as she died. A pause. The images continued. She didn't call for war. She called for us. A breath. So we respond. She held up a data chip, inserted it into a portable sync drive. Target, Drazathai Sector Command. Deep medical infrastructure. They think it's untouchable. The screen changed. Alien hospitals. Biobarracks. Command chambers camouflaged as infirmaries. We'll make them afraid to treat their own. The team moved like a memory sharpening into a blade. Each prepared their gear alone. Rituals long practiced. Cass disassembled a dermal regenerator and reassembled it into a bone shear. Poe loaded a stasis pod with surgical tools dipped in silence ink, untraceable by any known scan. Another cleaned syringes with the precision of an old chapel priest. Reyes oversaw the final component, the Whisper. A stealth dropcraft so black it absorbed stars. No weapons. No alarms. No failsafes. Just silence. They boarded without fanfare. One by one. No salutes. No speeches. Before departure, Reyes keyed into the fleet command. Her voice was flat. Protocol Seraph has launched. Confirmation of independent operation. The reply came after a pause, wrapped in bureaucratic theater. Understood. No acknowledgement will follow. Godspeed. She didn't believe in God, but she believed in purpose. And now it had teeth. The journey to Drazathai space took 12 hours through dead channels and bypassed routes. Silence sat with them the whole way. No one spoke. Only the occasional flick of fingers, the shuffle of equipment. Reyes sat alone in the rear compartment, reviewing the footage of Salrix on repeat. Not because she didn't remember, but because she refused to forget. Each freeze frame had something sacred to it. The way Davi had shielded a fallen child, arms stretched wide. The way Aline had still smiled through blood. They were supposed to represent Earth's best hopes. And that was what made it unforgivable. She closed the file, stood, and walked forward. They'll expect a warship, she said, voice low but clear. An invasion. Loud. Predictable. Cass looked up, one brow raised. They won't expect what we are. Reyes offered a thin smile. Medical procedure. Simple. Infiltrate. Identify. Excise. Poe signed again, finger slow. And if they beg? Reyes considered. Then we let them speak. And record what they say. She turned back to her seat. For the archive. The Whisper emerged in the shadow of an asteroid field near the Drazathai supply line. The coordinates were exact. taken from old ceasefire registries and backdoor health exchanges the Drazathai once signed in good faith. Irony. They docked with a civilian Met supply carrier. The Seraphs moved in shadow, like phantoms slipping between veins. No alarms. No resistance. Just a quiet reshaping of the ship's purpose. It would take them into orbit unnoticed. Inside the shuttle bay, Cass ran her fingers over the crates, blood kits, stim canisters, high-frequency defibrillators. She smiled for the first time in a decade. "They still trust the symbol," she said. Reyes watched her. "They think white means safe." She took off her command jacket. Underneath, her old medic patch gleamed. "Let's remind them what we used to be." They docked 3 kilometers above the Drazathai sector infirmary. No torpedoes. No flare of war. Just medics in white suits coming quietly down from orbit, exactly as they had before. Drazathai scanners reported incoming humans. Medical class. Unarmed. Another Earth relief group, one commander muttered. No one raised an alert. No one prepared for war. That was their final miscalculation. Reyes stepped onto the Drazathai platform with a slow exhale. Her boots made the same soft sound Aileen's had on Sailrix. The same weight. The same mercy. Her voice came through the comms, low and deliberate. "We begin here." She turned to her team, each one already moving like muscle memory. Their steps were quiet, their intent loud. Cass whispered, "Do no harm." Reyes didn't smile. No. She looked up at the alien infirmary, clean, busy, oblivious. "We don't save them anymore." The lights in the Drazathai sector infirmary pulsed a sterile green, steady and slow, like the heartbeat of a machine that believed itself immortal. Inside, dozens of medical personnel floated between pressure-sealed doors, tending to wounded veterans, recalibrating stasis tubes, filing incident reports in a language woven from clicks and pulses. There was no alarm, no hint that anything had changed. The humans were logged in orbit as a neutral relief team. Acknowledged, filed, forgotten. They walked in through the front gate. Reyes led, cloaked in the same white suit Alinmar had worn. Her gait was even, hands visible. The only weapon in sight was a portable vitals monitor slung across her chest. A lie, of course. Inside was a compressed pulse injector, no larger than a knuckle, capable of stopping a Drazathai heart mid-sentence. The first guard didn't even reach for his weapon. He scanned Reyes's badge and blinked with faint confusion at the designation. Medical Class 9 response. Directive, field neutrality. "You were not scheduled," he said in perfect trade tongue. "We were not planned," Reyes replied. That was the last thing he heard before Cass moved behind him and slid a pressure lancet into the base of his skull. He collapsed with no sound. Reyes caught him before he hit the floor. They dragged him gently to the nearest recovery alcove and arranged his limbs as if he'd chosen to nap. Everything they did had the softness of a prayer. The Seraphs split with clinical precision. Reyes, Poe, and Cass each took a sector: upper trauma, diagnostics, long-term care. The assignment wasn't arbitrary. It was anatomical. Cass moved through diagnostics, like an old spirit haunting familiar halls. She remembered the layout, the tools, the rhythm of data feeds. Her prosthetic leg made no sound against the polished floors. At one station, she paused beside a young Drazathai technician hunched over a bioscanning table. He was watching old footage, humans bleeding in red sand. Cass didn't hesitate. She slid a thin blade into the back of his neck and pressed her gloved hand to his mouth as he spasmed. His eyes bulged. She leaned down and whispered into the cartilage of his ear. "Do no harm is for the living." Then she left him twitching on the floor. Poe made his way through long-term care, stopping beside each patient only briefly. He ran his fingers across readouts, noting the way Drazathai hearts pulsed in clusters of 7 valves. His toolkit opened without a sound. Syringes, neuromuscular agents, inhibitor compounds he'd customized from Trauma Meds Earth once sent to the front. To the patients, he looked like salvation. To the monitors, he looked like silence. Each bed went dark in sequence. Not with violence, with closure. Flatline. 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 Poe never spoke. But every kill was exact. Humane. Terrifying. Reyes walked into upper trauma and found herself facing a wall of war-torn bodies. Drazathai veterans, their limbs rebuilt with alloy, their skin grafted in layers of overlapping chitin. Soldiers who'd bled too much and been saved too well. She hated this part, not because they were wounded, but because she knew what they used to be, and what they'd chosen to become. A medic past her didn't question her presence. Reyes followed him to the central node, where surgery schedules were logged, where nerve splice routines were queued. She leaned in and placed a chip on the console. It activated without flare. A simple virus. One she'd written in her spare hours between surgeries, back when she still believed in peace. It reversed every healing protocol. Burn wash fluid became accelerant. Tissue regrowth was rewritten to trigger hyperfibrosis. Surgical arms now defaulted to amputation mode. She stepped back, silent. A scream rose seconds later. Not hers. She walked on. Across the infirmary, lights began to flicker. Not go dark, just flicker. As if the building was blinking. The Drazathai called for diagnostics. No one responded. Cass entered the pediatric unit next, stepping past rows of empty incubators, and a lone nurse who looked up with alarm. "You're not." Cass stunned her before the sentence could finish. "No kill. Not yet. Just sleep." The nurse would wake in a room filled with silence and half-lit vitals. The message would be clear. We were here. We could have taken them all. We didn't. Yet. Poe reached the neural uplink wing. He approached a Drazathai physician mid-transfer. The alien looked up, confused. "I didn't call for human." Poe pressed a two-finger signal to the glass. "Prepare to resuscitate." Then he raised a stunner and fired into the doctor's cortex node. The alien convulsed, data streams crashing behind him like falling glass. Cass met him in the corridor. She raised a brow. He signed, "I only used the small dose." Cass nodded, approving. Back in the trauma wing, Reyes stood beside a stasis pod housing a general, the one who had ordered the Sailrix attack. She recognized his face from the leaked footage. Arrogant. Broad. A jaw like a cracked plate. He was sleeping now, healing from a minor spinal repair. She looked down at his vitals. Steady. Confident. She turned off the pod sedation field. His eyes snapped open. At first, he didn't understand. Then he did. "Human," he hissed. "You dare." She pressed a syringe to his throat and injected a paralytic. His voice froze midword. His limbs stilled. Reyes leaned close. No anger in her voice. Just the same quiet cadence she used before surgery. "We warned you." He tried to move his eyes. Couldn't. She placed a small device on his chest. It beeped once. Then every vitals monitor in the wing synced to his body. All of them now watched one heartbeat. She walked to the exit and paused. "One last thing," she said, and pressed the final command. Flatline. A single note, drawn out across the building, echoed like a benediction. The general died on 70 screens. His own face reflected back to every Drazathai medic who had once whispered peace. In the silence that followed, the Seraphs regrouped. Cass cleaned her blade with antiseptic. Poe offered Reyes a recovered medallion, Aileen's unit tag. Scorched, but intact. She took it. The Whisper ship was waiting where they left it. No alarms chased them. No guards pursued. But behind them, the infirmary began to change. Lights flickered. Vitals spiked, failed, fell silent. Bioscans rebooted, now echoing false data. Every doctor, every nurse, every commander now lived in fear of what they couldn't detect, of what they couldn't heal. Back on board, Reyes watched the feed replay. She saw the general's death in sharp detail. She saw the silence that followed. She whispered to no one, "This was phase 1. Cass looked over. "There's a phase 2? Reyes nodded slowly. "They still have facilities. Training grounds. Labs." She tapped the medallion between her fingers. "And we still have names to honor." Poe signed something. Cass smiled faintly and translated, What do we call this? Reyes stared out the viewport as stars flickered past like cooling embers. Trio. The final facility, Drazathai Command Corps Zeta, stood buried beneath 7 kilometers of black rock, shielded by ion fields, pressure mines, and bureaucratic arrogance. No alarm sounded. No protocols activated. Because no system had been designed to defend against medics. No system could imagine that the hands once trained to save lives would now move with precision toward ending them. The Whisper ship touched down in a dead canyon, long abandoned since the treaty days. Dust stirred, but nothing more. Cass ran a finger along the shuttle's interior rail as they disembarked, her eyes narrowing toward the distant slope of hidden turrets. Her prosthetic leg shifted against the ground, calibrated for descent. She did not slow. Poe emerged last, silent as always, adjusting the grip of his surgical case. Within it, scalpels, bone drills, sterilized wires. His signature remained, as ever, the absence of struggle. The things he touched simply ceased. Reyes stood at the front of the team, the only one unmasked. Her burn scars shimmered under the filtered starlight. She wore her old medic insignia over her heart, not as invitation, but as reminder. She had once been a healer, once believed in treaties, in empathy, in the noble illusion of neutrality. They had all believed. Before Sailrix. Now, they moved together like parts of a single heartbeat, each beat louder than the last. They approached the outer entry under cloaking scrubs, carried by a forged ID transmitted on old humanitarian bands. Inside the command center, Drazathai guards scanned the incoming signal and found nothing amiss. Earth sealers. Another visit. Perhaps a checkup on old promises. Perhaps something softer than war. Reyes raised her hand. The moment they crossed the pressure seal, the serifs became the end of a sentence the galaxy never wanted to finish. The first kill was surgical. Poe slipped a dermal filament into a technician's cranial port while nodding politely at another. He smiled faintly as the body seized, then folded. Cass hacked a neural relay node, rerouting all distress signals to loop back onto internal monitors. To the Drazathai, the base remained calm, peaceful, silent. Only the dead noticed the difference. They moved deeper, hall by hall, chamber by chamber. This facility was different. It pulsed with strategy, not healing. Every wall echoed with the echo of orders that had killed hundreds, no thousands. Tactical blueprints, resource maps, genetic profiles. It was here that the Drazathai had written the death sentence for the medics of Sailrix, filed neatly under strategic disruptions. And it was here, in the center of it all, that he waited. The general, Kuroth Zen, high strategist of the outer corridors. Larger than his record suggested. Tall, plated, adorned with war crests stitched from the skin of 3 fallen species. His mandibles clicked softly as he reviewed recent surveillance. Humans moving in silence, Drazathai dying without screams. He did not yet understand, but he felt the walls closing in. A tremor beneath the base drew his attention. A flicker across the power grid. One of the chamber doors reported a false echo. No breach, just the suggestion of one. Kuroth rose slowly from his command dais, posture coiling like a serpent ready to strike. "Begin a sweep," he commanded. Someone is pretending to be invisible. But by the time his guards moved, it was already too late. Cass dropped from the ventilation shaft first. Her blade found the gap beneath the second-in-command's spinal socket. Poe struck from behind the central data pillar. 2 scalpels flicked across exposed nerves. 4 guards collapsed before they could call for help. Kuroth turned, arm rising to signal emergency lockdown. But Reyes was already there, standing within the inner ring, staring at him with the stillness of an executioner. Her voice didn't rise. "You ordered the Sailrix breach." Kuroth's gaze narrowed. "They were unarmed. You gave us no reason to consider them sacred. They were medics. They were humans." Cass stepped forward, the blade in her hand dripping with antiseptic. Kuroth looked at them all, mandibles flexing in disgust. "This is your answer? You come to me with scalpels." Reyes tilted her head. "No. We come to you with clarity. She stepped forward and opened her medkit. Inside, a single device. A pulsar probe wired into a defibrillator casing. Custom built. Kuroth laughed. You seek to end me with tools for revival? Reyes smiled softly. You misunderstand. We seek to correct the mistake of saving you in the first place. She set the probe against his chest and activated the charge. His body jolted, not from pain, but from the rapid collapse of his secondary nervous system. The probe didn't kill. It stripped. One by one, his muscle control failed. He dropped to his knees. Cass knelt beside him, whispering, Do you remember any of their names? Kuroth wheezed. What names? Reyes leaned in. Aline Mar, Davi Chun, Tomas Esho, Hanarel. She touched the probe again. 4 of the 12 you killed. Smiled when they died. Didn't beg. Just raised 2 fingers. Kuroth groaned, limbs twitching like wire under stress. You won't be remembered, Reyes said. But they already are. Then she nodded to Poe. He stepped forward, placed a sensor node against the general's temple, and initiated the feed. The entire base's internal screens flickered, then synced. Throughout the halls, in every control room and rest station, the Drazathai saw their general's eyes widen, lips twitch, mouth freeze. Then they saw his heartbeat. 1 beat, another, a pause, flat line. Cass closed his eyes gently, like a patient leaving the table. Reyes stood slowly. She looked around the command chamber, still bathed in sterile light, now heavy with silence. She raised her hand and activated the last command. The virus embedded in the facility's med infrastructure unfolded across the system, rerouting every emergency protocol, every auto-defib, every surgical AI. No explosion followed. No collapse. Just failure. The base would no longer heal. Anyone wounded here would stay wounded. Anyone infected would rot. The Seraphs moved without hurry toward the exit corridor. They passed rooms full of Drazathai staff, paralyzed by confusion, not fire. They saw humans moving in formation, untouched, unarmed in any conventional sense, and felt the collapse in their lungs before their minds caught up. The medics didn't run. They never had. And now, they weren't saving anyone. At the shuttle, Cass finally looked back. A single breath passed between her and the base before she activated the final sequence. A silent beacon launched into orbit, transmitting a message across the quadrant. Not a threat, just a file. 12 names, 12 faces, and the quiet note. We sent medics. You gave us reasons. Now, we give you limits. No demands. No terms. Just correction. On board the Whisper, Reyes collapsed into the command seat. Not from fatigue, from closure. She ran her hand along the scorched metal of Aileen's recovered medallion. For the first time, her fingers trembled. Poe reached over and steadied them. He signed, What do we do now? Cass answered instead, gaze fixed on the stars ahead. We wait. Reyes closed her eyes. Until they ask why it's quiet. Because soon someone would notice. The Drazathai wouldn't retaliate. Not yet. Not after a silence that bled like this. Other species would rewatch the footage. The way the medics moved. The way the deaths came without struggle. The way the general fell, recorded for everyone to see. It wasn't terrorism. It wasn't war. It was mercy, delivered in clinical doses with careful hands. Back on Earth, a young girl watched the loop play again, her brother's final smile on Sailrix. 2 fingers raised. The new footage intercut beside it. Reyes standing over a Drazathai commander's still heart. Aline and Reyes. The beginning and the answer. The galaxy began to murmur new stories of humans who once offered peace with open hands. And when those hands were crushed, open them again, palm upward, to show only a blade. And in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, the galaxy learned that some medics don't come to heal the body. They come to cleanse the wound. Time of death, now. And somewhere, far from the front lines, a voice whispered through old comm channels once more. Prepare to resuscitate. But not them. Not this time. Humanity had already chosen who to save and who to let go.